I want you to move from overwhelmed by information to confident in what really matters. I want to help you move from being unsure towards direction and purpose in your healthcare. I want to introduce you to health experts. I want to let you in on tough conversations on women's health. I want to give you a place where you can lean in and learn how to take care of yourself. Let's transform your health. Let's get clear on your goals. This is Women's Health Unplugged. I'm your host, Dr. Jordan Robertson, naturopathic doctor.
Welcome to, I was almost going to call it an off-topic conversation for Women's Health Unplugged. However, I think our conversation today with our money mindset coach, April Stroink, is actually completely on topic. We're going to talk about money, and we're going to talk about the impact that money and financial health and wellness has on the health of women specifically. April, thank you so much for joining me for the podcast today.
Oh, my pleasure, Jordan.
So we usually open April by letting people introduce themselves and walking us through how they got to this spot in their career. I know you help health and wellness professionals, navigate their money challenges, but I really think that this is a conversation that is so applicable to the broader audience of women who are trying to get healthier and want to understand what the impact of their relationship with money is having on their success in their health and wellness. Can you just walk us through how you got here in your career and what you do?
Absolutely. So I took the path of finance in school, which was not the path that many women took, and ended up over 20 years ago working for a national insurance company. And at that time, like I said, there weren't very many women in the organization, and we were classically trained, if you will, in financial advice. But one of the things that I really noticed is that we were always pushing our clients towards making sure that they were properly insured, that they had their investments for retirement and what have you. But we were never talking about debt. We were never talking about spending. And we certainly never talked about behaviors around finance. And so I really found that that was a missing part of the conversation. And on my own fruition, I started to study behavioral finance. And so flash forward a few years, my husband and I owned a bricks and mortar retail business together. And so I really got to put all of that behavioral finance into play inside of that business. It was struggling, and as a result, my husband and I argued a lot about money and about the business and about cash flow and what have you. And so I really started to look at that there's got to just be a better way for all of this. And that's when I came across the Profit First book by Mike Michalowicz. And it worked so well in our business that I called Mike and said, I've got to be a part of this. And so I have been practicing Profit First in my business since 2017. But along the way, my husband and I have been together for, oh my gracious, a long time, 20 plus years. And he has a severe learning disability. And so for him, numeracy was a great challenge and super embarrassing and shameful for him as well. And so I'm coming in with a total mechanical mindset when it comes to money. And he just can't meet me on that same page. And so really a lot of this study that I did was to make our household more harmonious when it came to our finances. And so I have a program where we boil everything down to one number with your with your spending. And for him, it worked so well, and it worked so well for our family that then I started teaching this methodology to clients. And so I've really now moved away from quote unquote traditional financial planning to the 5 pillars of financial health and wellness, which includes generating revenue, making sure that you understand how you're spending your money, eradicating debt, and saving for the future, and building your emergency savings net. That's what I built my practice on.
So, I mean, even if we go back to like your mindset around all of those pieces, I feel like if people are struggling with money, like the last thing they do is go, I need to read a book about this. right? I feel like when people are struggling with something, especially with money, we just kind of go with that, like, cross your fingers and hope it will turn out differently tomorrow kind of approach, right? And
Hmm.
which I honestly think people do that with their health too.
Hmm.
But that must have taken some courage, or I don't know what the better word is there. That's just a totally like entrepreneurial way of dealing with it, to say like there has to be something more here that I need to learn.
Well, yes. And it actually took me leaving my career in corporate because it just wasn't aligning with the way that we were being taught, and the way that we were selling to others just didn't align with my values. And I don't think that the connection with the product and the client was connecting either. And so I left that really great job to pursue this on my own, because I just felt that there's just a whole disservice to a community, women especially. Um, and so really started to investigate this, had some really great mentors along the way. And yeah, absolutely. I've been kind of swimming against the stream for 20 years. Now, I love that there's a lot of women now getting into the space, and a lot of people are now talking about money mindset. But for those last 2 decades, it felt like I was alone beating the drum on that. It's not just understanding the mechanics of money, which a lot of people feel stress about because they don't understand it, especially people with learning disabilities like my husband, and then trying to marry the mindset. So I want to marry the two of them to get you to your financial goals.
Yeah, and I don't think that, if we want to sort of think about the way that health kind of comes into those conversations, is that that's not often part of the conversation, right? Like the impact that finances have on stress. It's like we talk about it like it's a given, like, oh, money, yeah, stress, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
we don't separate them very well. We just imagine that those two things come together. I was saying before we hit record, like I can't think of another thing that people put on their patient intake forms in the what's your number one stressor. I can't think of anything that people would put more than their finances into that section of their intake form.
Oh, absolutely. It is the number one cause of mental health stress, physical stress. The stress, of course, as you know, stress inside your body manifests itself in all kinds of different ways and impacts your health. And if you're constantly stressed over your finances, it's obviously going to affect your health. But also, it's the number one reason for relationship breakdown in Canada as well. Your listeners, I know, are from other countries as well, but I would say it's number one or number two. So interestingly enough, we tolerate somebody being unfaithful to us more so than we would somebody being financially unfaithful to us. And so, you've got two people coming from two different money stories and trying to combine their money story together, and it just puts even more stress on the situation as well. So it causes work absenteeism. So if anybody's listening and you are an employer, it doesn't matter how much money that you may give your employees if they haven't mastered their behaviors or their money mindset, because it'll just keep compounding. So I always encourage employers to offer financial literacy as part of their employee package as well. It is, again, and especially during this time, during COVID and all of the uncertainty around inflation and interest rates and gas prices and everything that we're seeing, people are just getting more and more stressed about their money, when really it's like your health. The only thing that you can really control when things are uncertain is your behaviors and your feelings and your approaches and your actions towards it.
So you mentioned money story there. I just want to touch on that for a second. Like how do people know what their money story is? Like are there tips and tricks for
Yes.
figuring out what your money story is?
Yes. So, like most things in life, your first teachers are your parents. And so, what your parents, how they talked about money, or how they reacted around money, or how they didn't talk about money, even more importantly, will have a huge impact on your money story. And so, in my webinars, I always put the question of, what is your very first money memory? And interestingly enough, a lot of people haven't thought about that. And when they do think about it, it starts to bubble things up. And so when you identify that first money memory, and I always talk about mine was my brother had a massive party and his friends stole my money that was supposed to be for my 10-speed super cycle from Canadian Tire. Um, my mother just paid back the money, didn't make him pay it back, even though I had to save for it. And so as an adult, his money story has been that of victim going forward, somebody always bailing him out, where mine has always been I save for everything that I want and always taking a look at it and what have you. And so even in the same family, you can have different money stories as well. But I really would sit with that question of what is your very first memory of money and how has that impacted how you show up in your money story today?
Yeah, it's such a cool exercise, especially when you're doing it in a partnership, right? And so if the woman is like part of a partnership where maybe her money story is different than her partner's money story, then is that where the conflict is coming from?
Absolutely. And so, how each of us approach our money and our money story, and especially if we haven't had those difficult conversations before we get married or before we become common law, and all of a sudden you're both living in a house together and sharing finances. And I'll just share my own story. Is again, my husband has a learning disability, but we were sharing an apartment, and he couldn't help me make the rent that month, and yet a pair of new ice axes landed at the door. And I'm like, yeah, that's not going down. But his money story was that these things weren't important and they'll all take care of themselves, which they did because his parents always helped him and I always helped him out. And so that was his money story going forward, which of course can build up a lot of resentment. And so sometimes when I'm working with a couple, this is the first time that they've actually had these conversations together. And I know a lot of couples that have come through the program that have said this was better than marriage counseling because we actually got to the root of what the problem is. And you need to work together. And so that's what my program does as well, is the couple works together to change their money story as a couple going forward. And I'm not going to lie, I've had in 20 years, there's not much I haven't seen. I've
Hmm.
seen spouses having bank accounts that the other spouse has no idea about. I've seen spouses hiding large purchases. I'm not talking about a pair of shoes in the back of your closet. I'm talking barbecues, snowmobiles, ATVs that they're hiding at the neighbor's garage because the other person isn't aware of it, or their debt. I always say if you're going to go on a date with somebody and you think it's getting serious, share your credit scores with one another to see how serious you are going forward. But like these are things that you need to know about before you cohabitate, because as I said, it's the number one reason for split up in marriages and in couples.
You said before we started, like, this is something like people talk less about money than they do about sex. Like you said, that people like, we kind of make that assumption that we should just know what to do, right? That like if you're handed money because you went to work, that now you know what to do with it. And so there isn't, so even though we're maybe carrying forward that the money story, which I see as being partly emotional, right? Like it's like that embedded emotion around money, but like actual like practical doing the things with the money is not really something that we spend a lot of time developing or learning either.
Even though, interesting, like as a lot of people say, I've never taught this stuff in school. And I teach a lot at the high school level here in Nova Scotia. And I'm telling you, you you don't absorb the information until you're ready. And so even if you did learn the mechanics of how this all works at school, if you don't understand your behaviors and your emotion around it, you just said that partly emotional, it's 100% emotional. It's exactly the same as health, right? Eating calories in, calories out. We all know that. We all know that. The same as don't spend more than you make. We all know that. But emotionally, that just goes out the window because health and money, they're all very emotionally driven. And so where we become when we become adults, where do we get most of our information? Well, unfortunately, from the institutions that make money off us doing the wrong things with our money. And so I always give the example of you first day at Frosh Week and you need to walk through Credit Card Alley to get to the campus pub, and you've got a credit card and you're 18, 19 years old and you're at the pub, and that's where I see a lot of people, their whole money story starts right there.
I remember something I read that you had written that said something to the effect of like all borrowed money is a product, or all debt is a
Debt.
product
Debt is a
that
product,
you
yeah.
bought. Debt is a product that you bought from someone else. And I'd never heard it framed that way. And it was such a it was like one of those light bulb moments for me. I think also as an entrepreneur, we like to call all of our debt good debt because we think that we're always like reinvesting in all the things. When
Yes.
like thinking about it from that perspective, we're like all of it is a product. And you're right. Like if people want to know something about money, where do they look? They look on like a bank website.
Hmm. And that's not always altruistic advice.
That's right. Like you're automatically approved.
Well, yes, yes. I don't even want to get into the host approval and what have you. And again, then people get themselves into a lot of hurt. And then you start to see breakdown of relationships, breakdown of health, addiction, work absenteeism. It just spirals. And that's why health, when we take a look at our finances, that is just one of the main pillars of health because of the chain reaction that it has to all of these other aspects of our well-being. And the other thing too is it's so personal, and it's so relative to who you are as a person and what you value. But yet we're bombarded, right, with 1,000 different messages every single day of what wealth looks like and what we should have. And so we've been so far removed now from what we value that this is where I think all this unhappiness is starting to set in.
Yeah. What do you mean by that? I kind of want to hear you say that in a different way because I feel like this is really important.
Well, I'm just going to take what's currently happening in the world. And tomorrow is International Women's Day. I don't know when this episode is airing, but tomorrow is International Women's Day. And I have a piece called If Money Was a Woman, and if we were actually in touch with the feminine side of money, we would be aligning our how we spend with where our values are. Because in Canada, we get to vote once every 4 years and cast a ballot, and that's really important. But people feel so helpless, and you're not helpless because every day where you spend money is a vote for the world that you want to have. And yet we don't make that connection. And so we are supporting maybe companies that don't have equity, or we're supporting companies that don't have women on the board as leadership, or we have companies that we're supporting that are contributing to the toxic masculinity that we're seeing happening with war. And so we don't realize that money is just an object and we control the power. But we've just gotten so flip-flopped of now being the power in money that it's just an object, it's just a tool. And yet our relationship with it is just so entirely complicated. And so I think if we know the mechanics of how money works, 100%, but also knowing that it's a tool and I have the power over it. And really, like I said before, you can control your behaviors around it. It's decisions that you make. And what I find is part of my programs, I do a spending analysis. And when I take a look at how people are spending their money and in a very non-judgmental way, just show them, oftentimes they find, wow, that's not actually in line with the goals that I actually want to achieve for this world, for my children, for my spouse, for myself. And it's just about a reset and just saying, hey, I mean, I love a chai latte as much as the next person. But when I have them every single day, there's no joy in it anymore. And so how do you bring the joy back into your spending and align it with the lifestyle and the world that you want to live in?
And I immediately go back to health because I always do. But thinking of people say, "Oh, what are your values?" and say, "Oh, I value my health," right? But then we look at like that, the relationship between what we spend on our health versus what we expect to get for free from our health, just speaking in Canada with our publicly funded healthcare system ish, that's it's not often in alignment, right? Because those same people that say that they value their health are also maybe not putting their resources towards the things that would make that a reflection of that value. It's funny you mentioned the what was it? What were the shoes? Was they shoes that your husband bought? Even though were those boots that you talked about?
He bought climbing axes.
Climbing axes. So my husband used to be a dentist, which he's retired from because for many reasons, burnout maybe being the number one. But part of that conversation was so fascinating because people's teeth would be like it's like horrific repair, right? And this is something that becomes a determinant of all the rest of their health. So when people lose their teeth, their nutrition goes to shit. There's so many things about what happens to their health when their teeth are lost, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people wouldn't buy a tooth, but they would in the same breath talk about how they were about to go on an all-inclusive trip to Mexico. And for him, that became such an issue, right? Because he was like, you're telling me that this root canal is too expensive, that you don't value it, you don't value me, you don't value this whole thing, you can't see the forest for the trees, and you're going for 1 week and it's triple the cost of what this stupid tooth would be. And for him, that like was part of the demise of his, like, the loss of love for that profession, was trying to hit people over the head with the idea that maybe they needed to try and keep their teeth. But I see that
I don't think would be an argument you would need to have.
No,
but anyway,
but it was so often, right? And I think, one of the things that I always find so fascinating is that when I'm working with, because I also work in the private healthcare sphere, right? And so we both did for years. We were both working in private healthcare, and the amount of times that we came across patients where they didn't feel like they should have to spend any money on their health, or they just hadn't planned for it at all. And so they felt like they were almost like we were stealing from them, or that their health was stealing from them because they had allocated that money for something else. And now they were going to have to pay for their illness.
mm-hmm.
And yet they value their health, right?
Well, I think that this is a product of our system. And so we feel like, I think that we're a product of that system because we quote unquote feel that we have free healthcare. We don't. It's just embedded in our taxes. And at the same breath, we say our taxes are too high. And so I just think that we feel that because of the system that we have, that it should be free. Well, I'm sorry. I am not going to get my proper health in 15 minutes with somebody as I do with my naturopath, right? So that's why I've chosen to work with a naturopath in conjunction with my doctor, because I get the service as a consumer that I am looking for. And so I'm willing to pay for that. And I think we've just become so out of touch with it. And it's the exact same thing with our money too, right? We've become so out of touch with it because money in the last few years has been so cheap. So people have decided that instead of saving up for something, they can go and borrow, get a line of credit or what have you at 7% or what have you, and not even think about it because money is free and it's cheap right now. And then we're getting into this place where we're getting higher interest rates, and all of a sudden, the same thing is that you're talking about. It's like, well, wait a second, right? Like,
that's not fair.
What do you mean? That's not fair that I have to pay this back. And so we're kind of a product of our system. And so that's why I always want people, again, getting back to, the only thing you can control is your behaviors, right? So brush your teeth, eat the apple, make different decisions when it comes to your spending as well. But again, it's all very emotional. And when you talk about that trip, nobody's at the table saying, oh, you should see the root canal that I got. Sean just gave me the beautiful root canal. No, they're all like, hey, look at my pictures of my trip to Hawaii. And so what do we value all of a sudden? The trip to Hawaii that our neighbor took, not the picture of our new root canal. And so these are cognitive biases that we all have. It's called herd behavior or keeping up with the Joneses. And so that's one of the 7 cognitive biases when it comes to money that keep people from doing quote unquote the right things with their money. Our brains are just wired really strangely when it comes to money and to our health.
It's funny because I always give patients the example if I have the opportunity to. If your kitchen burned down and you were given a check for 15 grand from the insurance company, what would you do? You'd spend 50,
Mhm.
right? Immediately go like, oh, you know what I've always wanted? I've always wanted this glass black splash and whatever, right? You would take the like bare ass minimum that you got from the insurance company and you would triple or quadruple the spend to get what you really wanted. And when
Mhm.
we think about our healthcare or some of those other pieces where we're offered the bare ass minimum as an option, anytime we have to pay in excess of that, even if it's in alignment of our values, we all of a sudden feel really yucky about it. And yet, really, you're just trying to build the health of your dreams, right? I would love for people to have an aspect of their finances being thought of from their health's perspective, whether that's the rainy day fund for if I in the future need something that is not going to be covered by the insurance? Or am I trying to optimize my health so I can feel well enough to change top line revenue, right? Which is a total other conversation that we're not
Totally.
often having with women. It's like, what would happen if you never missed work, right? From a financial perspective, what would happen to your life if you felt well enough to pursue all the things you wanted to pursue? That there's so many missed opportunities there because we haven't thought about investing in our health in that way.
Exactly. And when you take a look at it too, and you put it into perspective of one more visit to your clinic versus going out to dinner, like this was the same thing on the when people think of insurance as a liability, I always think of it as an asset because I've been doing it for 20 years. And I'm telling you, when somebody becomes disabled or they have a critical illness or, God forbid, their spouse dies, no one ever says, God, I wish I'd bought less insurance, right? And yet, like, if you can't go to work because of your health, you can't earn an income to afford that trip to Hawaii or everything else. Like you've got to make that connection. And so when I'm building a spending plan for a client, when I ask them is what do you want to spend on health? And that could be going for a massage every week to remove tension. It could be going to see a naturopath. It could be what are you spending on supplements and vitamins right now to optimize your health? Because you hit the nail on the head that if you are not, my mother always had a saying that health is wealth. If you don't have your health, there's very few other things that are going to be in line. But interestingly, because I'm a curious person, mom always said that, I always then studied, well, does wealth equal health? And it does. If you take a look at people who, and I mean, I don't mean wealth as in you have a BMW and a 5-car garage and what have you. Wealth is very personal. But if you are not stressed over your wealth or your financial issues, it directly correlates to better health and better healthy choices.
Like one of the like base social determinants of health is how people feel about their money, right? Because if you feel good about it, your capacity to make choices for yourself from a health perspective and your access to the various things that you would need to support your health, it just goes up exponentially. And two, I'm not, there's certainly like low income um, groups of people who are oppressed by their finances because of their inability to access health care and healthy food, etc. So there's that, right? Which, not as a separate issue, that's a very important issue, but also people in those kind of that middle income ground, if they don't feel secure in their finances, it still has the same impact.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I want to just touch on those like emotional behaviors, the emotional buying, because I like to think that some buying behavior isn't emotional, but I don't think that's true after us talking, over the course of a few months. I don't think that's actually true. But how do we recognize those things in ourselves? Like, what is the actual steps that women can start to take to even think about their emotional buying?
Okay. Absolutely. So after the word diet, there's no other restrictive word in the English language than budget, right? Budget and diet are, nobody wants a budget, nobody wants a diet. And so the reason being for budgeting is based on economic theory. And economic theory states that human beings will do the right things with their money all the time. In 20 years, I've never found said human being. And so we all have these emotional tendencies when it comes to our money. We talked about, I have a whole thing on the 7 cognitive biases I won't go into fully today. But as much as people in my industry study behavioral finance, the big marketing companies and the big stores put millions, billions of dollars into it. Take Amazon, for example. They know that there's trillions of money in abandoned carts online. And they study the reason why is because there's too many steps to buy. So they spent millions of dollars in developing the one-click system. Your credit card, everything's in there. You just click, right? So they know people are having a good bad day. They get online, they see that barrier's removed, they will buy more often. It's the same thing when you go into a retail store, right? If you go into Shoppers Drug Mart to get the cheap eggs, well, the cheap eggs are a loss leader that are at the very back of the store. So you have to go through all the cosmetics and everything else. And they know that the way that your brain works is that you won't just go in for the eggs. You'll come in and buy X amount more. Costco, totally set up for emotional buying. Your grocery store, all of the chocolate bars, all of the gum, all of those little items. We knew this. We owned a retail business for 13 years. We put all of those little baubles at the front of the cash because it's impulse buying. It's how we are wired. And so just like your health, if you're having a day where your energy is low and you haven't eaten properly, and you haven't exercised, and you get home and you're like, oh God, there's a white bagel there. And that's just the path of least resistance. And I'm going to eat that white bagel instead of a cucumber or what have you. It's the exact same with your finances. You're just exhausted, you're having a bad day, and you're on a stupid budget, and the budget's trying to get you to do all this mental math, and you're supposed to have this much for gas, and you're supposed to have that much. Forget it. Your brain is like not going to do it. And so you walk into an Aritzia or you walk into a Sephora, which are also very cleverly laid out for behavioral finance, and then boom, you're totally off your budget. And then just like food, you spiral because you spent too much money. You come home, you feel really bad because you overspent, and then you just go back and the cycle happens again. And that's how people get into this death spiral with their debt as well. And so, like all things, willpower is not enough. So you have to have a good system that works with, you know, what your behaviors are. And so identifying that, yes, I am a human being, not in economic theory. And therefore, I know my behaviors are this. So what is a good system that can help me overcome these behaviors that I have? Will you fall off the wagon from time to time? Of course, you're a human being. But if you have a system, you can get yourself back on really, really quickly. It's the same thing like for me to go to the gym. That's why I have a personal trainer, because I will go, I will show up, I will work 10 times harder for her than I would ever work on my own. And to take it even one step further, I lay out all my gym clothes. If it's really early, I might even sleep in my gym clothes. So it's one less barrier. We've got to create those systems inside of our money too that work with our behaviors so that we can reach our financial goals. Understanding the mechanics of it's like understanding what Bitcoin is and crypto and all of this, and not understanding your behaviors, it means nothing. You won't stick to the plan.
Funny, I thought of so many things while you were talking there. I remember the first time I watched my daughter impulse buy something, and it was with her own money. And she had her little debit card, and she knew how much money she had in her bank account when she went up to the cash, and she had the 2 little shirts that she was buying. And then there was a jar of scrunchies at the checkout. And I could see her doing the mental math of like, okay, they're $9 each. That means I can get 2 for 18. That with the shirts, and I can see her doing the like, the mental math, like she's only 10, right? She's counting on her fingers, and I can see like automatically she was like, I got enough money in there. I can totally do this. And so she impulse bought the scrunchies. And I took pictures of it, like total like mom paparazzi, being like, oh my God, she's like trying to figure out and manage her own money, which is hilarious. But she also was succumbed to the jar of the scrunchies at the front.
Of
Um,
course.
and it isn't that different than people trying to work on a nutrition plan, because we don't often have any long game strategies with nutrition.
Mhm.
We don't know why we're doing it, right? We don't.
Mhm.
The goal is so far away that when it's Friday night, like there is zero dopamine in that side of broccoli that you're having with your chicken, and so you seek that like instant reward of the cookies or whatever it is.
Mhm.
Whereas if you have goals that are achievable and manageable, and someone's helping you and you're accountable, you're maybe slightly more likely to pass,
Oh,
right?
more than slightly more likely.
And then I can see my daughter, like she had no plans for that last $18 in her account, right? She doesn't know what she's saving for. She has no goals, but like we're adults are not that different, right? Like, okay, yeah, I got an extra $18 in there, because we can't see the forest for the trees. We don't know why we're doing it, right? And then we're standing there and like we want the dopamine of the scrunchies, and so we just buy them.
So this is called Parkinson's law. So Parkinson's law states that demand will always meet supply. And so the way that you can trick your brain into not buying the scrunchies is to limit the supply. And so that's why I'm a big, big follower of having multi-bank accounts for multi-goals. So as soon as you put over your $500 a month for your vacation fund, or your $40 a month towards your chai lattes or whatever it is, then yeah, what is actually left in the bank account is to be spent. Or that what I do is calculate a weekly number. And so your brain goes, oh, I only have to think of one thing. And the one thing is this weekly amount. And I can spend right up to that weekly amount on anything that I want to. And I make the conscious choices of what it is. Because in the background, what I'm doing is I'm putting money into these different bank accounts towards my financial goals. And so psychologically, human beings feel a loss 2 times more than we feel a gain. And so if you go to pull that money out that was for your vacation fund to buy 3 scrunchies, your whole guts and everything will go, I know I don't want to do that. And so that's for that end goal. So what you want to do is you want to replace those dopamines that you used to get from spending money with the dopamines of saving and seeing it start to happen. Is that going to happen after a week? No. 2 weeks? Probably not. That's why my program is 6 months, because you start to see this traction, and then you start to see people who were spenders just now all of a sudden see that money sitting in that bank account for a trip, or for their health, or for their kids' RESPs, or for whatever it is. And they will really consciously have a very hard time for pulling that out. Whereas before, when it was all in one bank account, like your daughter's example, your brain just won't do the mental math. It won't think, oh my God, I have my annual insurance payment's coming out 2 weeks. I can't buy those scrunchies. We just won't. Your brain just can't.
So why is this so important for women, April? Like that was, one of my goals in us having this conversation is that I don't think we're having money conversations with women often enough, even though we see them starting to show up in and wanting this information. I think I see, even in the women's groups that I'm in, I see more interest in financial literacy. I see more women running companies and more women stepping out and being their own boss, which I think is fantastic. Why is this so important for women to have these skills?
It's essential because, as I said before, women have been left out of the money conversation for a very long time. It was a quote unquote man's world. If you take a look at all of the best-selling financial books that were ever written, they're all written by men. And so, as I said before, I'm super excited about everything that's coming out for women in this sphere. Being in this industry for over 20 years, I just caution that a lot of it's still coming from the masculine side of the equation. And I'm sorry, I don't want somebody yelling at me because I went and bought a latte, or that I can't step into a restaurant until my debt's all paid off. Like, I'm not going to respond to that. And I think a lot of women are not responding to this being yelled at and being shamed at, and you should have known. And, I don't think that that's the conversation that women want to have. And I think that they're still sort of stealthily going through the door to try and seek out this information. And I don't think that they're always finding the information that is relevant to them. And so I think that we just women have to own their money story. If for nothing else, the chances of you outliving your spouse are great, right? Women are living longer. And so they need to start planning for that longevity, and they need to start planning for the fact that they may, one day be holding the whole bag. And if they don't understand what's happening in their finances, I was working with a couple this week. She doesn't have a sweet clue what's going on with her finances because her husband's taking care of everything. If anything were to happen to him, that was one of the questions I asked. She's like, I wouldn't know where anything is. And so we're at more of a risk as well to be taken advantage of. And so we've really got to stand into our money power. But Jordan, I think you got to find somebody who aligns with your values and is speaking your language, because it doesn't matter. You will get into a plan and it doesn't feel right for you, and just like in health, and you may not stick to it. So super important, but don't concentrate so much on the mechanics of how it all works. Stick to the plan or work with the person that aligns with you. What we know to be true is women are better money managers because they will stick to a plan, especially when it comes to their investments. If they are aligned with their investments, they make more money than their male counterparts because they're not in and out of the market. They stay in the market. And it's the exact same thing inside of their businesses as well. Yes, we may be less risk takers, and sometimes that can be to our detriment, but we will more stay the course. And in the long run, especially when it comes to investing and investing in the right instruments, you'll see that women come out ahead.
I love that. I find that so fascinating.
And women, 89% of women worldwide look after the household budget.
What
And they
percent?
control 89%.
89%.
And we have the biggest consumer power too. In the United States, women are over 50% of the consumers and worth 15 trillion annually in their buying power. And yet, how are we being marketed to? Like pink power? We don't want that. And so yet we've made a lot of strides, but we still have a long way to go. And like I said before, every dollar that you spend on a company casts a vote for the world you want to live in. So make sure you're casting your vote for women and moving women issues forward.
It's funny, as you were talking there, it made me think of my grandma was not, well, neither of my grandmas, but my one grandma especially was not involved in the finances of her household. And she was given the cash money for the groceries every week. And that was it, right? That was the amount of money that she had the flexibility on. And so she just would like coupon cut and save on the groceries so that she could take some of the money that was meant for food and allocate it for something else, right? Like for herself. And it's funny because when I think about, women's position in their family with respect to their health, women are still kind of doing similar things, right? It's like, I'll take care of my kids, I'll take care of my partner, I'll take care of this. And then if there's like 5 minutes left at the end of the day, then that one will be for me. And it makes me think of my grandma's grocery money that she would like siphon off $8 here and $15 here. And she had it in a little like cushioned box thing that was in her night table. Like I knew where it was. and that was how she got access to getting her nails done or spending money on her like wellness, whatever it was, as if she took it away from the food money secretly. And when I think about what I want women to take away from these thoughts and conversations around their money is like, yes, I love you talking about the things like the debt repayment and debt as a product and all of those things, but also that I'm also curious in how women increase their top line revenue by feeling better, right? And how women can step into their money power, not by spending less necessarily, although we probably all should do that too. But also that there's that like investment in themselves aspect that I think we we don't just need the grocery money at the end of the week or whatever's left over. That can't be what we dump into our personal development and our health.
Totally, totally. And I don't think that we've given ourselves, just like you said, I don't think women have given themselves the permission to have that. I have coached so many women who are in a bad relationship because they think they can't leave because of the money, or that are in a toxic job that's affecting their health because they don't think that they could leave because of the money. And so I always ask, if I was able to show you that money wise you could leave, what would make you stay? Like, we've got to be understanding that we can have that power with just a few tweaks, but we just feel so trapped because of the money, and it's not always necessarily so. And so having that mentality that, especially as business owners, that we take whatever's left over at the end of the day, it just doesn't help move us forward inside of our business or inside of our health. It's that whole cliche of put your oxygen mask on first, right? How can you possibly help somebody else if you're not in good health? Or, I always think of too of when you're in this place of excess or surplus, that means you're covering your own needs, so that if you do want to help women who are on the margins who need food or shelter or whatever it is, you can help. If that's your values, money is a tool that can help you help others too. And so we really just need to get into the mindset that it's a tool and we have the power to use it how we want to.
I love it. I love all the things that you said today, April, the like casting your ballot, showing where your value is. All of those things are incredibly important lessons. How can our listeners find you and learn more about what you do offer? Because the programs that you offer are so great.
Well, thank you. Well, I'm on all the usual places. So on Facebook at April Stroink, and also on Instagram. And my website as well has all the information in regards to my program. So aprilstroink.ca, STROINK. So visit my website or book in for a chat. I'd love to continue the conversation.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your gifts with our audience. I think this is such an important conversation. I love that we opened it up.
Anytime. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of Women's Health Unplugged. My goal is to help you feel more confident about your health. Please remember that what we talked about today in the podcast does not constitute medical advice, nor was a doctor-patient relationship formed. If you have questions about your healthcare or about how today's topic pertains to you, please take it up with your family doctor, your specialist, or someone on your health team.